coffee smoke, the faint scent of burnt wood. And then the question that turned the room cold in the middle of summer. Dad, do you like the $5,000 Mary sends you every month? That was how last year's Father's Day began, and the moment I realized some fires don't need flames. My name is George Whitman, 68 years old, a retired firefighter. I've lived alone in this old wooden house in Portland for over 30 years. I used to think I'd grown comfortable with silence, until I learned silence can hide things too. My son Michael is now the CEO of a clean energy corporation in Texas. My daughter-in-law Mary speaks in smiles and expensive perfume. That day they came for lunch, bringing wine gifts, and a lie carefully wrapped in kindness. Before I tell you what truly started with that question, tell me where you're watching from. And if you believe honor can burn brighter than fire, hit that like button and subscribe. I froze. $5,000. For the past 10 months, I've lived off a small firefighter pension and the care packages sent by a local veterans group. I've paid my water and electricity bills one at a time, always late. No one sent me anything. I smiled faintly, my voice rough from surprise. Son, if someone's been sending money to your old man, I must have never seen it. Michael frowned, uncertain. And Mary, my daughter-in-law, leaned against the kitchen doorway, her white blouse crisp and perfect like she'd walked straight out of a magazine. She smiled and poured me more coffee. Her voice was light, smooth, practiced. Oh, you must have forgotten, Mr. Whitman. I've been transferring it every month. Maybe the bank made a mistake. Her perfume spread through the small wooden room, sharp floral overpowering the familiar scent of roasted beans and smoke. I nodded, said nothing. But inside me, something moved. A strange feeling, quiet but burning, as if after years of putting out fires for other people, I had just found one, igniting in my own home. They didn't know it then, but that day, Father's Day 2024, was the day I started to reclaim my honor. Portland, Oregon. The morning sky was unusually clear. The first light of summer spilled through the cracked wooden walls, brightening the room for a heartbeat before fading back into silence. I've lived here for more than 30 years in this house, with the woman who stood beside me through every blaze, literal and otherwise. Lauren, my wife, has been gone for 9 years, but some mornings I still hear her footsteps crossing the kitchen or the whistle of the old kettle on the stove, as if she's still here. The silence after someone dies isn't empty. It hums. It breathes. It's the sound of memories that refuse to sleep. That morning when I saw the black SUV turn onto the gravel road toward the yard, my heart tightened. Not out of joy, but because I knew surprise visits rarely come without purpose. Michael stepped out first. Navy suit, polished shoes, a watch flashing in the sunlight. He looked like a man who'd gone too far from where he started. I used to be proud of that. Until I learned that the higher a man climbs, the easier it is to forget who held the ladder for him. Mary got out next. Her eyes swept across the yard once covered in green grass and fire jackets drying in the sun, now just a patch of dust and a few dead plants. I saw hesitation in her eyes, then watched her hide it behind that perfect smile. She never let herself look small, not even in front of the man she should have respected. Inside, I made coffee. The air smelled of smoke, wood, and the faint metallic tang from the old firefighter's helmet hanging in the corner. Michael looked around. You still keep all this stuff, Dad? I handed him a cup and said quietly, Some things can burn away, son. Honor doesn't. It just changes color over time. Mary gave a polite laugh, the kind you give to a story that belongs in another century. Lunch passed slowly. Mary talked the most about their new investment project, her charity work, their house in Austin. Michael nodded occasionally, his eyes on his phone. I stayed quiet, listening to the clink of forks against plates, and thinking about that number, 5,000, echoing like a siren in the back of my mind. A single number that could change how I saw everything. When they left, Mary hugged me, her perfume clinging to my shirt like smoke. Michael said, "Don't worry, Dad, we've got you covered." I smiled and nodded, because every father knows sometimes silence is the only shield a man has left for his pride. The door closed, and the quiet returned heavier than before. I walked into the living room, opened the wooden drawer, and pulled out my bank ledger. The numbers stared back, cold, precise, unfeeling. No Mary Whitman. No solar core. Nothing. I sat there, hands trembling slightly, not from age, but from something alive beneath the skin. Not pain. Not sadness. Something else. Fire. The kind of fire that doesn't burn houses, it burns illusions. The fire I thought had died with Lauren was waking up again. Not to destroy, but to illuminate. I looked at our wedding photo, Lauren beside me, smiling, her hair wild from the wind, her hand holding the helmet I wore the day I became a captain. "Lauren," I whispered, "you were right again." She once said, "If anyone ever touches what's yours, keep your honor, not your anger." I didn't understand it then. Now I do. I closed the ledger, listened to the wind breathing through the cracks of the door. Outside, the sun sank behind the pines, and the light bled across the wooden walls, a slow, spreading red like fire, remembering how to live. There are flames that don't need oxygen. They burn in silence, steady, patient, waiting for one lie to wake them up. And on Father's Day 2020, that flame found its reason again. I placed my hand on the old fire helmet, looked at Lauren's picture, and saw her eyes catch the reflection of dusk. From that moment, the first doubt was born, not about money, but about something deeper, love, trust, and honor. They say when you hear a crackling sound inside your walls, don't wait for the smoke before you look for the fire. I built my whole life on that truth. And the next morning I went looking for my own fire. Portland, 8 a.m. A light rain was falling. Each drop hit the pavement with the rhythm of a day that would not be kind. I put on my old firefighter jacket, the only thing that still kept its shape, and drove my 2004 Ford down to downtown Portland. The First National Bank stood on the corner of 3rd Avenue, a glass building, cold, spotless, shining like a block of ice in the middle of summer. I've always hated places like that. Numbers, air conditioning, bright lights. They all remind me that the world doesn't run on trust anymore. It runs on clicks. The teller was a young woman, Sandra Nguyen, mid-30s, polite voice, calm eyes. I placed my worn bank ledger on the counter and said slowly, "I need you to double-check something for me. Any transfers from Solar Core, Austin, Texas." She started typing. The glow of her screen reflected on my face, tired-lined but steady. A few seconds later, she looked up and shook her head. "No transactions, Mr. Whitman." I nodded. But then her eyes changed. Something flickered behind the reflection of that screen. She frowned slightly. "Wait. There's something else," she whispered. "There's another account under your name, opened about a year ago. George Whitman Holdings, LLC. I leaned closer, voice lower than the rain tapping the window. "I've never opened a company. Ever." Sandra looked around, lowered her voice even more. This account receives monthly deposits from Solar Core. $4,800 regular as clockwork. Her eyes met mine, a mix of suspicion and pity. I'm sorry, Mr. Whitman. Someone might have used your information. I walked out of the bank straight into the rain. The drops hit my face cold, sharp like ash that hadn't cooled. I stood on the curb, watching people hurry by, young faces moving fast, not one of them knowing that a 68-year-old man had just discovered he'd been turned into a name on someone else's paperwork. In this world of numbers, you can be erased with one click. No fire, no blood, just a signature, or worse, a forged one. By afternoon, the rain eased. I drove home the Ford groaning on the wet road. When I turned onto my driveway, I noticed something wrong. The garage door was open. A quiet kind of fear crawled up my back. I stepped out. Inside, empty. Gone was the red Chevy 1971. The one Lauren and I repainted the summer after I retired. That truck wasn't just steel. It was a piece of her the day we first met, when she'd asked me to haul some paint cans for the station. Now there was only an echo, the wind whistling through the doorframe, a hollow sound that cut like a blade. I took out my phone and called Michael. He answered in that clipped, professional tone background noise, humming like a machine. Dad, I'm in a meeting. What's up? I said quietly. Where's your mother's truck? Silence. Then a soft sigh on the other end. Oh, Mary said it was taking up space. She helped you list it online. Got a good price. Don't worry, the money probably went into your holdings account. Holdings. The word struck like metal against metal. A scratch, a spark. I didn't say another word. Just get back to your meeting. Then I hung up. That evening, the rain stopped. I sat alone in the garage, sunlight slipping through the open door, turning the dust in the air to gold. Where the truck had been a dark oil stain spread across the concrete, a black scar where a memory had been dragged away. I sat on an old stool and opened my notebook. Monday, June 17th, 2024. Bank. No transfer from Solar Core. Found false account. Chevy missing. Mary said sold. Michael confirmed. I closed the book and set the pen down. My hand trembled slightly, not from age, but from the effort of holding my anger in place. People think fire needs gasoline to burn. It doesn't. Sometimes it starts with betrayal, small, quiet, but hot enough to consume everything that was once warm. I stood and opened the metal locker in the corner. Inside were the things that used to define me. A flashlight, a pocket knife, a cracked old radio, and a notebook Lauren kept while I was still on duty. I flipped to the last page. The ink had faded, but her words were still there. If someone ever steals what you built with your own hands, you don't need to burn their house down. Just let them burn themselves with their own greed. I smiled. Because maybe, just maybe, I'd found my first spark. That night I went through every document I had. Receipts, letters, statements, envelopes I'd never opened. Some were from banks in Texas I'd never even heard of. One of them read, Transfer Fee G, Whitman Holdings. I stayed up all night writing, cross-checking, listing every detail, not missing a single line. Every number, every name, every small inconsistency, each one was a piece of ash that would lead me back to where the smoke began. When the clock neared midnight, I closed the notebook. On the first page, under the dim yellow light, one line stood out in bold handwriting, June 17th, 2024. The fire began with a number. I looked up through the window. The Portland sky was black. No stars, no moon. Only the glow of a street light reflected in the glass. It glowed red like the reflection of a flame on the face of a man who had lost everything, except his pride. I closed the notebook carefully, set the pen beside it. Before turning off the light, I whispered more to myself than to anyone else. This time, no one's putting out this fire. The room went dark. Only the red ember of a half-burned cigarette glowed in the corner, flickering softly in the dark, like a promise. When you've lived your life around fire, you know exactly when it's about to start. Not when you see smoke, but when the air changes its smell. 3 days after that morning at the bank, I began to smell it, metallic, dry, sharp. The smell of something dangerous trying to hide. I sat at the old kitchen table, my laptop humming weakly beside a cold cup of coffee. Stacks of bank papers and handwritten notes surrounded me like walls of evidence. I opened my email, my first message in years. To Frank Davis, Chief Accountant, Solar Core Energy Subject. Need clarification on payment records. Frank, this is George Whitman. Back in 1994, I pulled you out of the gas depot before it went up in flames. Remember? I need a favor now. Tell me if your company has been sending payments to any account under my name. I hit send. Then I waited. The house was quiet. The only sound was the steady tick of the clock, like a countdown to something I couldn't yet see to. Outside, a light rain tapped on the metal roof, each drop a memory trying to speak. 3 hours later, a reply arrived. Subject need clarification. Hi, George. Of course, I remember you. I owe you my life. Yes, Solar Core has been transferring $4,800 each month to a secondary account named George Whitman Holdings. I assumed it was for your consultant stipend. The setup was handled internally by Mary Whitman. She uploaded your driver's license scan as ID verification. If that's not right, you should check immediately. Frank. I just sat there staring at the glow of the screen. It reflected my face, older, harder, but clear. Coldly clear. I'd seen buildings collapse, heard steel twist in the heat of fire, and lived to count what was left. That same instinct told me Mary hadn't just taken money. She'd built a duplicate life out of my name. A false George Whitman Holdings, a fake man built on a real man's honor. I typed back one short line. Frank, I never opened a company. Keep this between us. And thank you. You just paid back the first part of a very old debt. Then I closed the laptop, stood up, and looked out at the street. The rain had stopped. The road glistened wet silver, like veins of fire running under glass. They say time fades everything, but some stains darken the longer you leave them. Greed is one of those stains. That night I packed a small leather bag, a few shirts, my notebook copies of the bank papers, and the printed email from Frank. Lauren's photo sat on the table. Her smile was soft, but her eyes stern, like she was asking, "Are you sure?" I whispered back. Yeah, it's time to go to Texas. 2 days later, I left Portland. 1,600 miles, 30 hours of road ahead. The sky shifted as I drove from Oregon's gray mist to the dry gold of the American heartland. The highway stretched out before me, a thin black ribbon pulled tight between past and present. My voice blended with the sound of the engine, 9 years since I stopped chasing fires. But sometimes justice needs an old man willing to drive across the country to reclaim his own name. Austin, Texas. The morning heat was dry, sharp. The air smelled of dust, exhaust, and money, a scent I never loved, but one that never left me alone. The glass tower of Solar Core Energy rose ahead. On its entrance, a bright sign read, "Clean Future Starts Here." I let out a small laugh. Clean? Funny word, because some of the dirtiest things I've ever seen came wrapped in that word. I didn't go inside. Instead, I called Frank. He met me at a cafe across the street carrying a folder under his arm. He looked older, more lined, but his eyes still held that quiet gratitude of a man who remembers who pulled him from the fire. "George," he said, "I didn't realize how serious this was. She opened the account through the internal HR system, used your scanned ID and digital signature. Nobody questioned it. She's the CEO's wife." I opened the folder. On the first page was a copy of my driver's license, my name printed in neat black letters, and beneath it, a signature mine almost. 90% identical. Then I saw it, tiny text at the bottom corner of the file, uploaded by M. Whitman. The first feeling wasn't anger. It was cold. The kind of cold that sharpens your mind and burns without flame. "Frank," I said quietly, "don't worry, you did the right thing." He asked, "What are you going to do?" I looked out the window at the mirrored building across the street. Let's just say I came to Texas to visit my son. That afternoon, I drove to the Austin Federal Bank, where the holdings account was registered. I didn't plan to go inside. I just wanted to see it. And then, as if fate had a dark sense of humor, Mary walked out of the glass doors, beige folder in hand, gray dress, sunglasses, movements quick but confident. I lowered the window, watched her through the side mirror. She stopped to answer her phone, voice low but clear enough that I could read the words on her lips. "Yes, honey, I'm just meeting a client. I'll head back soon." A client. Behind her, the glass doors reflected the bold letters Austin Federal Bank. Mary hung up, walked briskly to the black SUV, the same one she and Michael drove to my house on Father's Day. Just before opening the door, she paused, looked around. Her gaze swept across the parking lot and for a split second met mine. She didn't recognize me, but she felt it that someone was watching. The way she adjusted her glasses and turned away a little too fast told me everything I needed to know. She was afraid. When you can smell fear on someone, don't rush to light the match. Let them build their own fire with their own lies. Then just wait until the flames reach their hands. That night I checked into a roadside motel. A flickering neon sign painted the room red, the color of exhaustion and rebirth. In the mirror, I saw my reflection, older-lined but not weak. I opened my notebook and wrote June 22, 2024, Austin. Mary opened a false account using my ID, caught leaving the bank. Lied to Michael, said she was meeting a client. I closed the notebook and turned off the light. Outside, the neon glow blinked through the window, casting red across the ceiling like the pulse of a distant fire. I stared into the mirror one last time and whispered not to anyone else, but to myself. The fire is spreading. And this time, I'm the one holding the hose. The night swallowed every sound, leaving only the hum of the air conditioner, steady as the heartbeat of a man preparing for his first battle after 60 years of fighting everyone else's. I left Texas the next morning. No goodbyes, no warnings, because sometimes silence is the loudest answer a man can give. The road back to Portland was long, sun-scorched asphalt waves of hot dust rising like ghosts. I kept the radio on not for music, but to fill the kind of quiet that feels too heavy. The static on the speakers clicked in rhythm like a clock ticking down each second, pulling me closer to what I had to do. They say time heals all wounds. But some wounds aren't meant to heal because when they still bleed, they remind you that you're alive. By the time I reached Oregon, the rain had returned. The June storm washed the Texas dust off my old Ford, and when I stepped inside the house, the familiar creak of the wooden floorboards welcomed me back, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. The walls were still lined with old photographs, the same golden lamp, the same silence. Only this time, there was something new inside me. Resolve. I opened the drawer in the old cabinet and pulled out a small tin box one Lauren had kept in the kitchen years ago. Inside were a few keepsakes, a silver ring, a faded birthday card, and one yellowed envelope. On the corner, written in her hand, "George, open only when you can't trust anyone else." I sat down. My fingers trembled as I unfolded it. The paper was brittle, the ink pale and wavering like her voice near the end. "My love, if someone ever touches what's yours, keep your honor, not your money. Money turns to ash, honor is the fire. And if you can still hear me in the wind, that means the fire hasn't died." I closed my eyes. The smell of old paper and dust carried me back to that hospital room, to the last time she held my hand. I'd promised her I would never let anyone trample the family's name. Maybe it was time to keep that promise. The next morning, I drove through the rain to St. Andrew's Church, the same one Lauren and I volunteered at for years. The rain fell like needles thin, relentless. I walked across the wet brick path. The heavy wooden doors groaned open, and the scent of burnt candles mixed with old timber filled the sanctuary. Pastor Lee was there, older now, his hair almost white, but his eyes still bright, the same man who once helped us build homes for veterans. When he saw me, he smiled. "George Whitman," he said, "you finally came back to church." I looked at him and replied quietly, "I came back for the fire, not for God." He set down the cloth in his hand, and his voice softened. "Honor is a fire, my son. Just don't put it out with fear." I didn't answer. Some words don't need replies. They just stay with you, like embers waiting for air. That afternoon, I drove to the west side of Portland to see Evelyn Carter, an old friend of Lauren's. She used to be a family law attorney, now retired, living in a quiet house filled with sunlight and order. But behind that calm, there was something unbroken, the kind of energy that never really retires. When I told her why I came, she studied me for a long moment, then said, "Lauren talked about you often. She said you were the kind of man who stayed silent when insulted. But this time, George's silence is complicity." I handed her the printed email from Frank, the bank statements, and the copy of the forged ID. She read in silence for 10 full minutes. When she finished, her voice turned steel. "This is elder financial exploitation," she said. "They used your identity-forged documents and withdrew funds from your son's company. You can file a report with the Oregon Elder Financial Abuse Office." "I'll help you," I asked softly. "You're helping me because of Lauren." Evelyn smiled faintly, eyes dim with memory. "I'm helping you because you still look like a man who lives by honor." "That's rare." We worked the whole afternoon. She organized files, scanned evidence, and entered line after line into the state system. When she reached the field marked Authorized Representative, she paused. "Do you want to authorize me officially?" she asked. "If we proceed, it'll reach Solar Corps. It could affect Michael." I looked out the rain-streaked window. I don't want to destroy my son, Evelyn. I just want him to see who's lying. She nodded, then slid the final form toward me. Then sign it, she said. This isn't a verdict. It's a declaration. I picked up the pen. My hand trembled not from fear, but from the weight of what that signature meant. The ink spread slowly across the paper like smoke finding its way through air. Evelyn watched quietly, then said, "From now on, you're not a bystander anymore, George. You're a witness. And once justice starts moving, it grinds through every lie in its path." I nodded. I've stood inside burning buildings, Evelyn. I know when to put out a fire and when to let it burn itself clean. When I left her house, the rain had stopped. The sky was copper with evening light. The wet road shimmered like the surface of something reborn. I drove across the bridge. The wind was cold, sharp, carrying the faint taste of salt and steel. And for the first time in months, I felt calm, the kind of calm a firefighter feels after hearing the last collapse of a burning building. Lauren once told me, "There are two kinds of people, those who run from smoke and those who walk into fire to find the truth." I'd spent my life putting fires out, but this time I was going to walk straight into one. On my desk, the ink on the complaint form was still wet. State of Oregon, Elder Financial Abuse Case, 2749, Whitman, George. Below it, my signature shaky but clear. I stared at it for a long time, then whispered, "The battle's begun, Lauren. And this time I'm not saving anyone. I'm saving my honor. Some fires, even long after they've died, still leave warmth in the ashes. And sometimes, it's the ashes themselves that keep a man awake at night." 3 days after I signed the complaint, someone knocked on my door. It was Bill Carter, an old friend, a brother in smoke and soot. He came carrying 2 cold beers and a pack of cigarettes. Bill used to be a lieutenant in Station 14, the last man from my old unit I still kept in touch with. 10 years ago, his own son sold their family house behind his back, pocketed the money, and left him with nothing but an RV and a scar that never closed. Since then, Bill's been parked on the edge of town, talks less, laughs less, and trusts almost no one. I invited him in. We sat under the porch, rain misting off the tin roof, the soft hiss of drizzle sounding like old embers cooling. Bill cracked open a beer, looked at me, and said, "Heard you got yourself into a mess. Money again, your boy." I shook my head. "No. The woman he married." I told him everything, the forged account, Lauren's letter, the complaint I'd just filed. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he sighed. "George, you know where I screwed up?" I looked at him. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the smoke curling between us like a ghost. "I stayed quiet," he said. "I thought silence was noble. But silence, George, silence is just how they learn you're weak. And once they think you're weak, they come back for the rest." I tilted my head back. Cold rain hit my lips, sharp, metallic, alive. Bill stared out at the gray yard. "You're not like me," he said softly. "You've still got fire. Don't let it die just because you still care." I looked him dead in the eye. "No," I said. "This time I'm going to let it burn." That afternoon I drove to Evelyn Carter's house. She met me at the door with a thick stack of folders, her silver-rimmed glasses glinting like a blade. "George," she said, "if you're serious about this, we need evidence, not feelings, not guesses, numbers, signatures, timestamps." She spread the files across the table. "This is 6 months of statements. Here, HR records from Solar Corps, and this, the fake ID Mary submitted." I nodded, flipping through page after page. Each number felt like a spark, small, precise, but together forming a slow, growing flame. Evelyn said, "You'll need to reach out to Frank again. We have to confirm if she misused the company credit card. If she did, that's a federal offense. That night, I emailed Frank. Less than an hour later, he called back. His voice was tight, nervous. "George," he said, "I checked. There are 14 suspicious transactions totaling $22,000. Luxury shopping hotels in Dallas, flights to Hawaii, all on the company card and everyone approved by her." I asked quietly, "Does Michael know?" Frank exhaled hard. "No. But if this goes public, if you file, the media will find out. And when that happens, SolarCore's going to explode." I waited a beat. Then I said, "Frank, sometimes the only way to stop a fire is to let it burn until there's nothing left to feed it." The next morning, I went to my old workshop. Dust hung in the air, and sunlight spilled through the cracked windows. It smelled the way it always did, metal oil and rust. The scent of truth, cold, sharp, and incapable of lying. I set the documents on the workbench and flicked on the light. Each sheet glowed under the yellow bulb lines of ink shining like coals. My first real pile of evidence, enough to burn through every excuse. That evening, Evelyn came by. She looked over the papers, nodding once. "Enough to open a supplemental file," she said. "But George, listen carefully. Sometimes the best way to make someone expose themselves is to let them think you've forgiven them." I frowned. "Forgiven?" Evelyn leaned on the table, her voice measured, almost surgical. "If Mary believes you've let it go, she'll relax. She'll slip. And when she does, she'll say something or do something in front of witnesses that we can use." I was quiet. Outside, the wind howled against the metal siding, the sound like old flames breathing back to life. People think forgiveness is mercy, but sometimes it's just a way of giving justice time to arrive. I stood and walked to the back of the workshop. Inside a rusted locker hung an old firefighter's plaque, photos of Lauren and our veteran group pinned beside it. Below them sat a thick, dusty binder, Veterans Fundraiser Dinner. It was an event Lauren and I had hosted every year to raise money for injured firefighters and veterans. I looked at the plaque, then at Evelyn. "You have a plan?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes. We'll bring it back, the Veterans Dinner. But this time I'm not raising money. I'm inviting witnesses." Evelyn smirked slightly. "Careful, George. You're playing with fire." I smiled faintly, eyes still on Lauren's picture. "I've lived in fire my whole life, Evelyn. I'm just choosing when to strike the match." That night, Portland was unusually still. The city lights flickered through the fog, casting a pale glow across my empty workshop. On the table sat Lauren's letter beside the stack of bank statements. I read her last line again, then whispered to the dark, "Honor is fire. And if someone tries to drown it in greed, let them be the first to burn." I folded the letter, slipped it into my jacket pocket, and opened my notebook. June 29th, 2024. Begin plan Veterans Dinner. The fuel's ready. Now I wait for the wind. I shut off the light, leaving only a single candle on the table. The flame danced in the glass, casting shadows across Lauren's smile. In that light, she almost looked alive again, warm, calm, and proud. "See that, Lauren?" I whispered. "The old fire's still here. It never died. It was just waiting for the right spark." They say the things you try to hide always find their way back to you. Sometimes not through a courtroom, not through the press, but through a message from the one person who still believes in you. Friday night. Portland was wrapped in fog. I sat alone in the workshop, going over the guest list for the upcoming Veterans Fundraiser Dinner. The clock ticked steadily, the desk lamp casting a circle of gold light over stacks of papers coated in dust and memory. Then my phone buzzed. A name appeared on the screen, one I hadn't seen in a long time. Emma Whitman, my granddaughter, 18 years old. Michael and Mary's only child. We hadn't spoken since last year, since her birthday, the one where her mother told me, "Don't talk about the past, George. It makes people uncomfortable." For a second, I hesitated. Then I answered. Her voice was small, trembling. "Grandpa, I'm not supposed to call, but I have to tell you something." I lowered my tone. "Take your time, sweetheart." "What is it?" She took a breath. "Mom told me not to say anything, but I went with her to the bank in Austin today. I saw your name on a screen, a bank account ending in 4590. My chest went still. Those 4 numbers hit me like nails into wood. 4590. They weren't in any of my statements. Emma's voice shook harder. "They said it belonged to George Whitman Holdings. Mom told them you must have forgotten because you're old." There was a pause. Then her voice broke into a sob. "But I know you, Grandpa. You don't forget things. You still remember every ingredient in Grandma Lauren's blueberry pie." I swallowed the lump in my throat. "Thank you, Emma," I said softly. "But you can't tell anyone you called me, not your mom, not your dad. Promise me." She sniffled. "I promise." I hung up and stared out the window. The fog outside was thicker now, like a curtain being pulled across a city full of sins. In a firefighter's life, there are 2 sounds you never forget. 1, the sound of a building collapsing. 2, the cry of a child inside the smoke. That night I heard both in a single phone call. The next morning I showed up at Evelyn's house earlier than usual. She answered the door in her robe coffee cup in hand. "I know," she said dryly. "2 reasons you'd come this early: either someone's dead, or you found new evidence." I placed my phone on her kitchen table and hit play. The recording of Emma's voice filled the room. When it reached the words 4590, Evelyn's brow lifted. "You're sure about that number? I trust the girl," I said. She nodded, sat down, and opened her laptop. The blue light reflected off her glasses, turning her face into something sharp and surgical. Minutes passed. Then she froze. "It's real," she said quietly. Account ending 4590, opened at Austin Federal Bank in March last year. Authorized signatory Michael Whitman. I blinked. My son Evelyn shook her head slowly. "No. You're not hearing me. The signature's his, yes, but it's too perfect. That's not ink. It's a digital scan. Someone used an image of his signature. And the one who submitted it was Mary Whitman." My hands clenched until the knuckles popped. The room was silent except for the soft whir of the printer spitting out one page after another, each sheet a new cut into my trust. Evelyn laid the document in front of me. "This is our strongest evidence yet, George. If we file this with the Elder Financial Abuse Office, they'll escalate it to federal jurisdiction." I looked down at the paper. My name in bold. Michael's signature just below it. The boy I'd taught to hammer his first nail was now, whether he knew it or not, the face of the biggest betrayal of my life. My voice came out rough, almost cracked. "Evelyn, do you think he knows?" She answered with calm steel. "No. I think Mary forged everything. Used Michael's name, his signature, his position to make it look legitimate. All you need to prove is that you never signed, never authorized. That's enough." I sat back, fingers laced together. The office was bright white, but it felt like I was sitting in a basement, cold, airless, with no way out. Fire doesn't kill you right away. It takes your oxygen first until you don't even realize you're suffocating. Trust works the same way. Evelyn printed the final report, slid it into a thick file, and looked at me. "We'll submit the amendment Monday morning," she said. "But George, before the law speaks, you have to be ready for your last fight. The veterans' dinner will be her stage. Let her burn herself there." I nodded slowly. "She'll come," I said. "Mary never skips a chance to show the world how generous she looks." Evelyn smirked. "And people who love the spotlight always forget light also exposes shadows." That afternoon I drove home through the late sun. The windshield caught the glare, turning the whole road into gold fog. In my head, Emma's words kept echoing. "I know you're not like that, Grandpa." I didn't cry. But somewhere deep in my chest, a small warmth began to glow again, a fire rekindled by belief. That night, I opened my notebook and wrote July 3rd, 2024, Seattle. Emma confirmed account 4590. Forgery signed as Michael, created by Mary. Federal evidence secured. I set the pen down and looked at Lauren's picture. "See that, Lauren?" I whispered. "We're not alone. There's still someone, a child, who believes honor is real." The next morning, Evelyn and I went to the bank to verify everything legally. The clerk turned the pages, stopping at the section marked Authorized Signature. When the sunlight hit the page, a faint logo appeared, Solar Core's electronic seal. Evelyn looked up at me, her tone hard as steel. "Then this isn't just family anymore, George. This is corporate fraud." I nodded slowly, my voice low, cold, steady. "Then I've found it, the one thing that can burn both money and fake honor." Outside the bank, wind swept in from the Columbia River. The photocopies in my hand lifted, fluttered, then scattered into the air. I didn't chase them. I just watched as they floated away across the parking lot, like ashes finding their way home. Old fires can die, but their ashes always know the way back. They say there are two kinds of silence. One born out of fear, and one that comes when you know your next words will be the match that lights the final fire. That night I didn't speak much. I didn't have to. All I had to do was wait for the fire to start burning on its own. Portland, July 6th, 2024. The evening air was unusually cool, the sky clear. The last rays of sunset spilled over the red brick facade of Fire Station 18, the place where I'd spent almost 30 years of my life. The doors to the old hall stood open. The American flag hung proud on the back wall, rows of wooden chairs lined in perfect order. A sign outside read, "Veterans Fundraiser Dinner, Honoring Our Heroes." I'd chosen the right night, the right place, the right audience. Old comrades, retired firefighters, city officials, local press, every one of them a better witness than any judge could ever be. I wore the same suit I had worn to Lauren's funeral. The collar was frayed, but it was clean pressed and still fit. Lauren once told me, "When you want to be heard, don't shout. Walk into the silence and let the noise come from others." Tonight, I would do exactly that. Mary and Michael arrived right on time. Michael wore a gray suit, his usual confident smile. Mary, in a sapphire blue dress, a pearl necklace catching the light, looked around the hall the way a real estate agent appraises property. She walked straight to me, her voice sweet as sugar. "Grandpa, it's so wonderful you're still doing such meaningful things." I smiled faintly. Everyone has their own way of keeping their honor. Dinner began. The air smelled of coffee roast beef and fresh bread. People laughed, clinked glasses, the soft hum of music filling the space. I looked around at the faces of men and women who'd once walked through fire beside me, people who knew what keeping a vow really meant. and among them sat Mary, radiant, poised, holding Michael's hand as if her world were spotless. I stood, picked up the microphone. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice low and even. "Tonight isn't just about raising funds for veterans. It's about remembering that honor doesn't retire." The room fell silent, only the sound of the ceiling fan turning. I clicked the remote. The screen behind me lit up. A video began, a tribute reel for fallen firefighters. Ash smoke the faces of men I once called brothers. Then, for just a few seconds, the screen flickered. A new clip appeared. Black and white. Grainy. Footage from the security camera in my home. Mary, in a long coat, opening my file cabinet, rummaging through folders, slipping envelopes into her purse. The clip lasted maybe 5 seconds. Then the video switched back to the memorial footage, flames, sirens, and the sound of a bugle playing taps. The silence that followed was the kind that hums in your bones. No one moved. The only sound was the faint clatter of a fork being set down metal against china, cold and final. Mary froze. Her hand tightened around Michael's. She stammered, "Why, you had cameras." I nodded. "Security system, installed after the break-in last year. No reason. Just precaution." Her smile trembled, voice cracking. "I was just looking for insurance papers. You must have forgotten where you put them." No one said a word. From the second row, Bill Carter let out a hoarse chuckle. "People forget things, sure," he said, "but cameras don't." A few heads turned. I stayed silent, letting the truth breathe on its own. Then, I changed the slide. The next screen read, "Major Donations, 2024. As every year I said calmly, we recognize the donors who've supported our veterans. But this year, I found one donation worth mentioning." The screen shifted again. A single line appeared in bold white letters. "Solar Core Energy, $48,000 to G. Whitman Holdings." The room stirred. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Michael frowned, his voice tight. What is that, Dad?" I looked at him, steady as stone. "It's the name of the company my son sent money to. George Whitman Holdings. Surely you remember Mary's face, drained of color." Michael turned toward her, whispering sharply, "Mary." "What is this?" she stuttered, eyes darting. I don't know. It must be a mistake. An accounting error." I spoke into the mic again. My voice was soft, but it cut through the room like a knife. "There are no accounting errors here. Every transaction has an author." The back door opened. All eyes turned. Frank Davis stepped in. The accountant from Solar Core. His face was tense pale, but resolute. He walked to the front, a folder in his hand. "I'm Frank Davis, chief accountant at Solar Core," he said clearly. "I confirm that the $48,000 transfer was sent to an account under George Whitman's name, created and approved by Mary Whitman. She authorized the transaction herself." He lifted the papers. The seal. The signature. The truth. The room went completely still. Michael rose from his chair, white as chalk. Mary stumbled back, her chair clattering to the floor. "That's a lie," she cried. "That was for charity. You're twisting this." Frank's voice cut through hers. "These are time-stamped digital signatures verified from her login credentials. Copies have already been filed with the Elder Financial Abuse Office." I didn't move. Didn't smile. Didn't speak. Something inside me, something heavy, finally lifted. People think justice comes with the slam of a gavel, but sometimes it's just the moment one man stands and the whole room stops breathing. Mary's voice shook, tears rising in her eyes. You planned all of this, just to humiliate me. I met her gaze. No, I just wanted you to finally see yourself in the same light you've spent years avoiding. Michael sat down slowly, head in his hands. The room was still. Only the ceiling fan moved. Only the papers on the tables rustled. Then Bill Carter stood, his gravelly voice carrying across the hall. George, they said you'd never get back up after losing Lauren. But tonight I think she's watching you. And smiling. Evelyn walked onto the stage. Her voice was steady, precise. On behalf of the Elder Financial Abuse Office, I confirm that an official investigation is now open. This is no longer a family matter. As of this moment, it's a matter of law. Cameras flashed. The local press, who'd thought they were covering a charity dinner, caught something else entirely, a moment of truth. Raw. Uncomfortable. Real. Mary left the hall in a blur of camera lights. Michael stayed silent, his shoulders collapsing in on themselves. I stood by the doorway, watching the flashes fade. Fire was never meant to destroy. It was meant to reveal. And tonight, I just turned on the light so everyone could see who was standing in the smoke. They say justice always arrives late, but sometimes when it finally shows up, it carries with it the collapse of everything you once believed would last forever. The morning after. Portland woke to a heavy sky, gray, swollen, half asleep. In my kitchen, the old television hummed with static before the local news came on. The headline appeared in bright red letters. Breaking news, daughter-in-law, scams retired firefighter. Underneath it, a photo of Mary in that same sapphire blue dress she wore at the dinner, flash bulbs exploding across her face, eyes wide, mouth caught mid-word. The clip replayed the scene, her rushing past reporters' microphones, chasing her down the steps, while I stood behind the podium, still holding the microphone, expression unreadable. The anchor's voice cut in measured, sympathetic. Mary Whitman, wife of Solar Core CEO Michael Whitman, is under investigation for elder financial exploitation. Sources confirm she diverted company funds through a shell account under her father-in-law's name. I turned off the TV. The sudden silence felt heavier than the news. Outside fog clung to the workshop roof, seeping into every crack of wood and rust. Portland never really had sunlight, but that morning the grayness felt honest. Clear enough to see the truth. Someone had fallen, and something sacred, long buried, had stood back up. I used to think justice was a gavel striking wood. But maybe it's not a sound of power, it's the sound of trust breaking. Painful. Final. True. 2 days later, the postman left a stack of envelopes at my door. Not bills, not flyers. Letters. From strangers. Veterans. Firefighters I hadn't seen in years. Each one had a short message written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Stay strong, brother. Proud to know you served. Honor doesn't retire. I read every letter, slowly feeling each word like a hand on the shoulder. I didn't write back. Some things don't need answers. Instead, I picked up my old leather notebook, the one that had survived smoke, and loss, and wrote just one line: honor needs no explanation. Then I set the notebook beside Lauren's picture on the counter. The morning light filtered through the blinds, catching the edge of the glass frame, a thin line of gold across her smile, like she was still there watching. That afternoon, Evelyn stopped by. Her car tires crunched against the wet gravel outside. She walked in coat damp, holding a fresh newspaper still warm from the press. She placed it on my table, front page up. Solar Core suspends executive's wife amid fraud investigation. The subheading read, Company distances itself as financial misconduct probe widens. I read the article once quietly. Mary's name was there. The words "suspended indefinitely" sat beneath her photo like a shadow. Evelyn sipped her coffee. "The machine's moving on its own now," she said softly. "You don't need to do anything. Just stay quiet. Sometimes silence is the reward." I stared at the rain streaking down the window, each drop drawing crooked lines through the gray. "No," I said. "Silence isn't a reward. It's what's left after justice has spoken." Evelyn didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes understanding something words couldn't reach. That night, Portland rained again, the kind of rain that never ends, thin, steady whispering. I sat by the window listening to the water dance on the roof. The house smelled of wet wood, old smoke, and time. Lauren once told me, "The first rain after the truth comes out isn't punishment. It's baptism." That night I finally understood. The storm outside wasn't washing away sin, it was washing away shame. Wednesday morning. A knock at the door. Soft, uncertain. When I opened it, Michael stood there, shirt wrinkled, tie gone. Eyes hollowed, skin gray like unpolished metal. He looked older, not by years, but by truth. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he stepped forward, and before I could speak, he sank to his knees. "Dad," he said, voice low and rough. "I can't believe she did it. Everything I knew, everything was a lie." He shook his head, fighting tears. "I signed things I didn't read. I trusted her completely, and I never checked. I thought I was protecting you, but I was the one who helped her do it." I looked at him. There was no anger left in me, only the kind of silence that comes after a fire's been put out when all that's left is smoke and breath. I walked to the desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the letter, Lauren's letter. The one that had carried me through nights darker than fire. I placed it in his hands. "Read it," I said. "Then talk." He unfolded the yellowed paper, hands trembling. His voice cracked as he read aloud. "If someone ever touches what's yours, keep your honor, not your money. Money turns to ash. Honor burns forever." When he reached the last line, his voice broke completely. Tears fell onto the page, spreading the ink until the words blurred. "She knew," he whispered. "She always knew." I shook my head gently. "No one knows everything, son. But some people keep their promises, even when it costs them everything they have left." Michael sat on the floor for a long time. Then, barely above a whisper, he said, "I'll take responsibility. I'll cooperate with the investigation. I'll make a public apology. I won't hide from this. I owe you and Mom more than words can repay." I didn't move, didn't comfort him, didn't say I forgave him. Forgiveness isn't something you give. It's something that returns when the world has burned long enough. People think collapse means the end. But sometimes it's just the moment when the smoke clears and you finally see that the foundation beneath it all was already gone. That evening, I went out to the workshop. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled of earth and ashes. The papers were there, the case files, the letters, the old notebook. I reached up to a high shelf and found my old nameplate, Captain George Whitman. Station 18. I had taken it down when I retired, thinking I'd left the fire behind. But that night, I wiped off the dust and nailed it back to the wall. The metal caught the lamplight, not bright, just clean, and somehow that was enough. When I turned off the lamp, the reflection lingered soft gold against the dark wood, steady as breath. Trust breaks easier than glass. But if you're brave enough to gather the shards, you'll find the light still passes through them, sharper and truer. Michael came back later that night. He was holding a photograph, the three of us, standing in front of a red fire truck. Lauren's hair blown by wind, his small hand clutching mine. He placed it on the table gently. "I won't let the Whitman name be remembered for greed," he said softly. "I promise." I looked at him, and this time I nodded. No forgiveness spoken. No reconciliation declared. Just the quiet understanding between two men who've both been burned and finally learned what not to touch. Outside, the rain started again, soft this time, gentle. Streetlights shimmered in the puddles, casting long gold streaks across the pavement. I sat by the window watching the city breathe, washed, tired, but clean. Justice isn't a shout of victory. It's the sound of someone who once betrayed you, learning how to stay silent. Justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it comes with the sound of a single page turning dry sharp and impossible to reverse. Salem, Oregon, July 2024. Early morning. The sky was the color of cold ash, flat light, spilling across the gray stone facade of the Elder Financial Abuse Division. I sat in my truck across the street, watching through the windshield. On the courthouse steps, Evelyn. Carter stood beside Detective Harris, the lead investigator on the case. Harris, early 50s, broad-shouldered, the kind of man who never blinked first. He'd once worked federal financial crimes in D.C. until a corruption scandal drove him back west, where the smoke was quieter but no less thick. Evelyn waved me over. "George," she said, "this is Harris. From now on, he's the man who's going to help us pull the curtain down." Harris nodded, his voice gravel low. "I've read the files. Mary Whitman didn't just forge your name to receive payments. She filed federal tax returns under your identity. That's not just state fraud. That's federal. She could be looking at prison time." I said nothing. My eyes lifted to the courthouse dome, its slate-gray surface like the kind of ash that never blows away, the kind that just sits heavy with memory. People think crimes have shape knives, guns, blood, but sometimes they're made of numbers and signatures, and that kind of cold cuts deeper than steel. Inside the office buzzed with quiet authority printers, humming law clerks, whispering coffee machines dripping into silence. Harris laid the file open on the table. "We found 3 separate tax filings," he said, "all under your name, all within the last 2 years. Each refund was deposited into the same account under George Whitman Holdings. Total $36,420. Evelyn frowned. "Taking this federal would expose Solar Core. If we go that route, your son gets dragged in too. Are you sure that's what you want?" I shook my head slowly. "You know I don't want to burn him, Evelyn. Keep it at the state level. Federal will come when it's time." She studied me, then nodded. "All right. We'll keep it under Elder Financial Exploitation. We focus on the forged identity and that holdings account. For now." 3 days later, the envelope arrived, State of Oregon. Elder Financial Abuse Court, Salem. Summons to mediation hearing. The first court appearance. Not for punishment, but for negotiation. Negotiation, a word people use when they're trying to buy back honor with cash. That morning was cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones before sunrise. I wore a gray overcoat, the same one I used to wear to the station on winter shifts. The courtroom was small, low-ceiling white lights. A wooden table dividing 2 sides that once shared the same dinner table. Mary sat across from me. Black suit hair tied back, face pale, and drawn from sleepless nights. Michael sat beside her, eyes down, hands folded. I didn't look at them. I looked at the sign behind the judge's bench. Justice is not an act. It's a process. Evelyn leaned close and whispered, "Don't let her pull emotion out of you. Everything you say in here is recorded." The door opened. The judge entered, a middle-aged woman with the voice of someone who's seen truth twisted too often. She spoke clearly, without sympathy. The purpose of this hearing, she said, is to determine whether both parties wish to settle before the case proceeds to public trial. Mary stood. Her voice trembled, but she kept her chin high. Your Honor, I acknowledge there were administrative mistakes, but I never intended harm. If Mr. Whitman wants his honor, I will repay every dollar. I only ask that he withdraw the complaint. Silence fell over the room. Even the air stopped moving. I stood. My hands didn't shake. When I spoke, each word landed like a nail against wood. Your Honor, I said slowly, I didn't come here for money. If money was what I wanted, I would have stayed silent. I came here for something else. The judge looked at me. What is that, Mr. Whitman? I turned my eyes to her, not to Mary, not to my son. Honor has no price. For a long moment, no one spoke. Mary turned her face away, eyes red, shoulders trembling. Evelyn rested her hand on my arm, a quiet signal that it was enough. When the judge finally spoke, her tone carried the weight of a verdict already forming. The court schedules formal trial for August 29, 2024. This matter will proceed to open hearing. The gavel came down 3 sharp strikes, dry, cold, final. The sound echoed in that small room like the lid closing on a coffin full of trust. That afternoon, as we stepped out of the courthouse, the wind from the Willamette carried the smell of rain. Detective Harris's phone rang. He answered, listened briefly, then looked at me. Solar Core's just been flagged for a full audit, he said. The Department of Finance wants to know if the stolen funds trace back to corporate accounts. Evelyn exhaled slowly. The fire's climbing the rafters now. I didn't answer. I just looked up. The first drops of rain fell cold, deliberate, dotting my coat and darkening the pavement. In a big fire, the flames never die in the center. They die at the edges where people think they're safe. And that's when they spread fastest. That night back home, I sat at my desk. The house was quiet, except for the rain ticking on the window and the faint hum of the city beyond. I opened my notebook. The same one I'd filled with every loss, every betrayal, every truth I wasn't supposed to see. I wrote July 20th, 2024, Salem. Mary admitted indirect guilt, offered repayment. Court refused mediation. Solar Core under audit. The fire has reached the roof. I capped my pen, closed the notebook, and set it beside the picture of Lauren. The lamplight hit the glass frame, and for a moment her smile looked alive again, serene, as if she'd already seen this ending coming. Later that night, the phone rang. Harris again. His voice was tight controlled, but the kind that carried history behind it. I just got word from the feds, he said. The IRS has opened its own file. If Mary's found guilty of tax fraud, everything she owns, including her Solar Core shares, gets seized. I listened in silence, hearing the rain build against the window. When he finished, I said quietly, "The fire doesn't need me to put it out anymore. It's burning on its own." Outside, thunder rolled far off over the valley. I stepped onto the porch. The air smelled of metal and wet wood. Rain dripped from the eaves, each drop falling like seconds off a clock that had finally started keeping honest time. I looked out toward the workshop, its lights glowing dim through the mist. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel the weight of waiting, only the stillness that comes when the world starts to balance itself again. I didn't find justice. Justice found me. And when it did, It came not as a flame, but as the wind that finally made the ashes move. Some fires burn quietly through the winter. You don't see them not until the snow melts, and you realize the ashes are still warm. Salem, Oregon, January 2025. The air was so cold it turned breath into mist. The morning sky, silver gray, thick with clouds, hung low over the courthouse steps. Across the stone archway above me, the words were carved deep into the granite, "Justice is the conscience of society." I lit a cigarette. The flame flickered in the wind, then steadied, small, stubborn, alive. Behind me, Evelyn Carter approached long coat briefcase in hand. Her voice was calm, but her eyes sharp. "You ready, George?" I exhaled a thin line of smoke. "I've been ready," I said quietly, since the day she touched my honor. Inside the courtroom glowed in sterile white light. The wood floors gleamed cold as polished steel. On the right side of the room sat Mary Whitman, hair tied tight, gray coat, pressed smooth hands gripping a folded tissue until her knuckles went white. Behind her, Michael head bowed, eyes rimmed red. Evelyn set her files on the desk, straightened the microphone, and gave me a small nod. That was her way of saying, "It's time." Then the judge entered. Judge Morales, a woman in her 60s, with eyes that looked like they had seen every kind of human tragedy and still hadn't lost their clarity. The gavel struck once. Court is now in session for the case. State of Oregon versus Mary Whitman, under Statute 163.205, Elder Financial Exploitation. The sound of that word exploitation hung in the air like smoke. I didn't look up. I stared at my hands, the same hands that once pulled men out of fire. Rough, burned, scarred, steady. Today they weren't meant to save anyone, only to stay still while justice did its job. Evelyn rose. "Your Honor," she began, "this is not a case about money. It is a case about honor, something the defendant tried to steal through forged signatures, false accounts, and deliberate deceit. But justice, Your Honor, always finds its way back home." Her voice was quiet, but cut through the room like glass. Mary kept her head down. Her attorney stood and tried to salvage the moment. "My client acted out of misunderstanding," he said. "She only sought to manage family finances when Mr. Whitman refused assistance." Judge Morales raised her hand. Her tone was cool, unbending. "Counselor, no theatrics, no excuses." The man sat down defeated before he'd begun. Evelyn called the first witness. Frank Davis. He walked to the stand, the accountant from Solar Corps, his posture stiff, voice low but firm. "I am the chief accountant at Solar Corps Energy. I confirm that Mary Whitman created the holdings account using Mr. Whitman's identification. She also used corporate credit for personal spending, luxury items, travel, hotels. When I discovered the discrepancies, I said nothing at first. I owed Mr. Whitman my life. He once dragged me out of a burning gas station in '94. Today, I'm here to return that debt with the truth." His words landed hard. The courtroom fell silent. I looked down. Not with pride, not with anger. Just release. A man I once saved was now saving what was left of my name. Evelyn stood again. "Your Honor, we submit additional evidence tax filings from 2022 and 2023, electronically signed as George Whitman, originating from the defendant's registered device." Mary's breathing quickened. She whispered to her lawyer, fingers trembling against the edge of the table. For the first time, fear showed through the polish. Then Evelyn spoke softly to the judge. "We'd like to call a final witness." The courtroom door opened. A young girl stepped inside Emma Whitman. 18, hair tied back, gray sweater too big for her small frame. Mary gasped. "Emma, go home." "You shouldn't be here," but Emma didn't stop. She walked straight to the witness stand, hands shaking, voice unsteady but clear. "I have evidence," she said. "A recording from the call my mom made on July 5th. Evelyn nodded toward the technician. "Play it." The speakers cracked softly. Then a woman's voice filled the room. "Mary's. Don't trust him, honey. He won't live much longer. When he's gone, everything will be ours." The sound froze the room. Mary's shoulders shook. Her face crumpled. Tears spilled silently down her cheeks. Behind her, Michael bent forward, hands covering his face. Judge Morales closed her eyes for a long moment, then spoke, voice calm, but edged with iron. "Mr. Whitman has spent a lifetime holding on to honor through fire, blood, and loss. You, Mrs. Whitman, sold yours for a few checks. Do you understand the difference between honor and greed?" Mary didn't answer. Only the sound of a quiet sob broke the silence. I rose slowly. My voice carried low and steady, the way old men speak when every word costs them something. "Your Honor, I don't want anyone destroyed. I only want the truth to be seen. And today, I've seen it." Evelyn placed a hand on my shoulder. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Outside the windows, wind whistled through the cracks, pressing against the glass, like the breath of winter itself. Then the gavel came down. 3 times. Sharp. Final. Judge Morales read the sentence. "The court finds the defendant, Mary Whitman, guilty of elder financial exploitation. Restitution of $48,000. 2 years suspended sentence. Revocation of accounting license for 5 years. Federal tax fraud records will be forwarded to the Internal Revenue Service for further review." The words echoed like metal. No applause. No sigh of relief. Only the stillness that comes when something broken has finally stopped moving. I stood. Didn't look at Mary. Didn't need to. She sat, frozen tears dripping onto her hands, face pale under the courtroom light. I whispered to myself, not prayer, not triumph, just truth. Some fires don't need to be put out. They just need to be seen. Evelyn gathered the files, closed her folder, and leaned close enough for only me to hear. Justice delivered. We walked out into the cold. The sky above Salem was still gray wind, lifting dead leaves from the courthouse steps. Across the square, Frank Davis raised a hand in quiet salute. I nodded back. And then I felt Emma's arms wrapping around my coat, her tears soaking into the fabric. I placed a hand gently on her head. Said nothing. Because sometimes the truest comfort is silence, shared between generations. People think justice is a reward. But it isn't. It's the last warmth left behind after the fire has taken everything else. Evelyn turned to me. Her voice was calm, barely more than a whisper. "You won, George." I looked at the sky where the clouds hung heavy and low. "No," I said softly. "I survived." The wind picked up, swirling the leaves around our feet. My old firefighter's coat caught the light, not bright but steady, like an ember that refused to die. And as I walked away from the courthouse steps, I could almost hear Lauren's voice again, carried faintly in the cold January air. You did it right, George. You didn't burn them. You let the truth do it for you. People believe that when justice is done, the story ends. But it doesn't. Justice is never an ending. It's simply the moment when an old fire changes shape, burns softer, slower, but never goes out. 1 month after the trial. Portland had returned to its rhythm fog in the mornings, the Willamette River gliding like a tired breath, and the faint clang of streetcars echoing through the city's bones. The world looked ordinary again. But I wasn't the same man who had walked into that courtroom. The check arrived by mail, $48,000 in restitution. It felt heavy in my hand, not because of its worth, but because of what it cost to earn it. No sense of victory. Just a piece of paper, thick, cold, and sterile, like even justice knew how to keep its distance from those who had lost too much to get here. I stood on the porch, the winter light spilling through the gray. The sky was silver, the kind of silver that carries both warmth and sadness. For the first time in years, I felt heat inside the cold. Because at least the promise I made to Lauren hadn't turned to ash. The next morning I drove south to the old industrial district where the buildings rusted like forgotten memories. There, at the end of a cracked concrete road, stood Fire Station 18, the place I'd served nearly 30 years. The doors hung crooked paint peeled off in flakes, and weeds reached as high as my knees. I pushed open the rusted gate. The hinges screamed, the sound of time itself resisting change. Inside it smelled of iron and dust. Dark. Still. Silent. I switched on my flashlight. The beam sliced through decades of neglect, catching glints of what used to be oxygen tanks, helmets, old photographs of captains long gone, and a tarnished brass plate on the wall. Captain George Whitman, 1989-2015. I reached out, traced the letters with my fingertips. The metal was cold, but the pulse in my hand was steady, as if I'd just touched the younger man I used to be. They say fire only has 2 choices, to burn or to die, but those who've lived inside it know better. Fire can move. I bought the building with every dollar of the restitution money. Bill Carter handled the paperwork. Evelyn worked her legal magic with the city council. And within 2 weeks, I was the official owner of Station 18, once again. The first morning I opened it, keys in hand, I stood alone in the dusty hall. Light poured through the cracked windows, and the dust rose like ash, soft gold alive. Welcome home, Cap. Bill's voice came from behind me. He was grinning, paint-stained shirt, a bucket in hand, the same grin he used to wear on shift 30 years ago. Planning to turn this place into a museum, he asked. I shook my head. No, I'm turning it into a beginning. 3 weeks later, the gray walls blazed red again. New doors, fresh lights. The hall glowed at night, warm and alive like a heartbeat. On the wooden sign out front, hand-carved letters read, "The Whitman Firehouse Foundation, Veterans Training and Support Center." A small foundation, a place for young veterans to learn a trade, to rebuild lives, to remember that usefulness is a kind of dignity, too. Lauren had dreamed of a place like this. I remembered her voice one night, years ago, when she said, "When you retire, open a workshop for old firefighters. Not so they can remember the fires, but so they can remember they still matter." I'd laughed back then. Who would care about that? Now I understood. She'd always seen further than I did. Opening day. Portland rained a light silver drizzle. The sky was soft, the air carrying that faint sweetness of wet wood and renewal. Inside, I hung my old fire helmet on the shelf, the same one I'd bought back from a thrift shop for $60. The scratches were still there. Inside the rim, the faint engraving still visible, GW, 1989. I set it beneath the new lights. The brass caught the glow, and for a moment it shimmered like a tiny flame, rediscovering its breath. By late afternoon, a familiar truck pulled up outside. Michael. He stepped out, holding a small bouquet of dried lavender, Lauren's favorite flower. Emma followed behind, camera slung over her shoulder, a notebook in hand. "Bill told me what you're doing," Michael said, his voice rough but steady. I nodded. "Not doing. Just fixing something that should never have been left broken." He looked around the bright walls, the hum of new lights, the veterans laughing quietly in the back room. His eyes held something I hadn't seen in years, a mix of shame and pride. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then he said, "I lost the company. I lost the house. But I found my father." I met his gaze, and for the first time in a long time, I saw the boy he used to be before. Greed before pressure, before the world hardened him. My voice came out low, even. "Honor doesn't retire, son. It just changes the kind of work it does." Michael nodded, smiling faintly, the smile of a man who had finally learned what it costs to be humble. Emma lifted her camera. "Can I take a picture?" she asked. "I'm doing a school project, a short film about second chances. I want people to know your story, Grandpa." I chuckled softly. "You can tell it, sweetheart. Just don't make it sad. Fire doesn't need pity. It only needs respect." She smiled through the lens. The shutter clicked, the soft sound of memory being reborn. That night after they left, I sat alone on the station steps. Rain drizzled down, soft and endless. The light from inside spilled across the pavement, reflecting off puddles, each ripple dancing like a flame on water. I opened my old notebook, the same one that had carried every detail of pain, betrayal, and justice. And on the last page I wrote, February 12th, 2025, the Whitman Firehouse Foundation officially opens. The fire doesn't die. It just finds somewhere else to burn. People think the fire ends when the flames go out. But those who've lived inside it know better. Only when the ashes cool do you see the true shape of honor. Bill came out carrying the new wooden sign to hang on the main door. The wind from the Willamette swept through, rattling the chain lightly. As the sign swung, the last light of dusk hit the helmet inside, and for one brief second the brass flared bright, as if the fire itself had come home. I stood, looked out over the empty street, and whispered, "Not for anyone else. Just for her, Lauren. You see it now, don't you? Our fire never went out." Fire Station 18. Now, the Whitman. Firehouse Foundation glowed like a lantern in the Portland rain. From afar, its sign shimmered under the mist, a soft beacon against the gray. Inside, I stood under the old fire helmet, its reflection casting gold light across my shoulders. And for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of what was lost, only the warmth of what refused to die. Justice can take many forms. Sometimes it's a sentence, sometimes an apology. But honor has only one. It doesn't fade. It just keeps burning in those who are brave enough to carry it. They say that when a man grows old, the fire inside him fades. I don't believe that. Because when a fire has ever truly burned for honor, it never goes out. It only changes shape. Autumn 2025. Portland shimmered gold. The wind carried the scent of rain rust and falling leaves from the Willamette River. Inside the Whitman Firehouse Foundation, laughter echoed between the walls, the kind of laughter that makes you forget you were ever broken. 12 young veterans worked on old fire pumps, machines they saw as metal and bolts. But to me, they were symbols of life itself. I stood in the middle of the workshop, oil-stained sleeves rolled up, wrench in hand, voice steady. Don't just tighten. Feel the pressure. A fire pump doesn't need strength, it needs precision. Just like honor, one small slip and everything breaks. They went quiet, listening. One of the younger men asked Captain Whitman, "How many fires have you put out?" I smiled, wiped my hands with a rag. "I don't remember them all, but there's one fire I only put out once, and it didn't come from smoke or gasoline." I paused. The air grew still. "I've put out thousands of fires, but some can only be put out with the truth." Morning light spilled through tall windows, reflecting off brass nameplates on the wall. Above them hung a photo, Lauren smiling softly, eyes calm as ever. I often told the recruits, "If you ever wonder why I'm still here, look up there." They called me Cap. None of them had ever seen me fight fires, but they believed in me because I spoke little and kept my word. One afternoon, Emma walked in, camera in hand, notebook under her arm. "Grandpa," she said, "I'm doing my college essay. The topic's someone who taught me what school never could." "I want to film you," I chuckled. "I just teach kids how to fix bolts. What's worth filming in that?" She lifted the camera, voice soft behind the lens. "You taught me that honor burns brighter than fire." For a second I couldn't speak. A single line, simple, sharp, and truer than anything I'd said myself. I looked up at Lauren's photo and smiled. That girl I whispered said it better than I ever could. By late afternoon, sunlight slanted through the high windows, casting gold across the workbench. Inside the glass display case sat my old fire helmet, the same one I'd worn through smoke and chaos. Every dent, every scratch glowed in the light, each one a mark of survival. I sat down, watching the young men bent over the engine, their hands covered in grease. The air smelled of oil, hot metal, and effort. It was the scent of purpose. I've lived long enough that fire no longer scares me. But I still remember my first time in the smoke, hot, suffocating, blinding. What kept me standing wasn't strength. It was the thought, if I fall, someone else won't be saved. I looked at their faces, young, determined. In them, I saw the man I once was. And in memory, I saw Lauren standing in the doorway of the old firehouse, thermos of coffee in hand, smiling. "Promise me you'll always come back." I looked at her picture again and whispered, "I kept that promise, Lauren." The sun dipped low. Light poured through the windows, turning the room into fire and gold. Outside, the sign above the entrance caught the glow, the Whitman Firehouse Foundation. Honor never retires. A few of the young veterans were out front, raising a new American flag. The wind caught it, making it dance red, white, and proud. The sunlight reflected off the words, "Honor never retires, a streak of fire across the brick." Emma lifted her camera once more. "Okay, Grandpa," she said softly. "Last line for the video." I turned toward the lens, voice, low and deliberate. "Honor doesn't retire. It just waits for someone brave enough to keep it alive." When the camera stopped, Emma walked over, wrapped her arms around me. Her voice broke a little. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa." I smiled, resting a hand on her shoulder. Remember this, whoever keeps their honor is never poor. She nodded, eyes shining. Then she left. I stayed. The workshop was quiet again, filled with the hum of cooling machines and the whisper of rain against the windows. The wind from the Willamette brushed through the cracks, and the fire helmet inside the glass trembled slightly. The sunset reached it, lighting the brass with a single pure flare of red. The last flame. In the end, I learned that justice doesn't roar. It's quiet like a morning where you finally know no one's lying to you anymore. And honor. It doesn't need applause. It only needs you not to betray yourself. As I locked the door, one of the young men turned back. "Cap," he asked, "are you still afraid of fire?" I smiled, glancing at the helmet. "No, I'm only afraid that people will forget how many lives it saved." He saluted, then walked into the dusk. The door closed softly behind him. The room glowed orange and gold. I sat down, eyes closed, listening to the wind whisper through the rafters, gentle, rhythmic, like Lauren's breath beside me. Warm, endless, home. The next morning, sunlight broke through the workshop window, spilling across the sign out front. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, been betrayed, lost everything, but still believe justice is real, this story is yours. Share your story, because honor never retires. The light shimmered across Lauren's photo and the old fire helmet under the glass. Soft music rose, a slow piano melody. The sign outside glowed brighter until it looked like a living flame. After all this time, I finally understood you can't kill fire. You can only carry it forward. If this story touched you, hit like, leave a comment to share your thoughts. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories where justice, truth, and compassion meet. Because here, honor never retires.